seja bem-vindo ao Podcast MGFamiliar. Um podcast sobre temas pertinentes que nos fazem refletir e frequentemente com implicações para a prática clínica. E damos as boas-vindas ao nosso anfitrião, professor Carlos Martins.
I'd like to introduce you first to this person, whose image you may or may not recognize. This is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Since we're in Edinburgh, I'm a big fan of Conan Doyle. You might not know that Conan Doyle went to medical school here in Edinburgh, and his character Sherlock Holmes was inspired by Sir Joseph Bell. Joseph Bell was an extraordinary teacher by all accounts. And Conan Doyle, writing about Bell, described the following exchange between Bell and his students. So picture Bell sitting in the outpatient department, students all around him, patients signing up in the emergency room and being registered and being brought in. And a woman comes in with a child, and Conan Doyle describes the following exchange. The woman says, "Good morning." Bell says, "What sort of crossing did you have on the ferry from Burnt Island?" She says, "It was good." And he says, "What did you do with the other child?" She says, "I left him with my sister at Leith." And he says, "And did you take the shortcut down Inverleith Row to get here to the infirmary?" She says, "I did." And he says, "Would you still be working at the linoleum factory?" And she says, "I am." And Bell then goes on to explain to the students. He says, "You see, when she said good morning, I picked up her Fife accent, and the nearest ferry crossing from Fife is from Burnt Island, and so she must have taken the ferry over. You notice that the coat she's carrying is too small for the child who is with her, and therefore she started out the journey with 2 children, but dropped one off along the way. You notice the clay on the soles of her feet. Such red clay is not found within 100 miles of Edinburgh, except in the botanical gardens, and therefore she took a shortcut down Inverleith Row to arrive here. And finally, she has a dermatitis on the fingers of her right hand, a dermatitis that is unique to the linoleum factory workers in Burnt Island. And when Bell actually strips the patient and begins to examine the patient, you can only imagine how much more he would discern. And as a teacher of medicine, as a student myself, I was so inspired by that story.
Estimados colegas e ouvintes, tenho a impressão que todos nós ficamos inspirados por esta história. Este é um excerto de uma TED Talk com o título A Doctor's Touch, apresentada pelo nosso colega Abraham Verghese no evento TED Global de 2011. Falei-vos deste colega na parte final do último episódio do nosso podcast, o episódio 147, a respeito de um livro magnífico que ele escreveu, Cutting for Stone. E, a esse propósito, aproveito para realizar aqui uma correção daquilo que afirmei a respeito desse livro. Nesse episódio, eu afirmei que o livro era autobiográfico, mas isto não é correto. Cometi esse erro induzido por um texto que tinha lido de apresentação do livro e também pela forma como o livro está escrito. A narrativa decorre na primeira pessoa. Contudo, depois aprofundei melhor a minha pesquisa e se é verdade que o autor se inspira em certos momentos no percurso da sua própria vida, o livro não é factualmente autobiográfico, nomeadamente em relação à descrição e à história da sua família mais próxima. Isto nem sempre é fácil separar a ficção da realidade. Abraham Verghese é então um colega nosso, infecciologista, que trabalha nos Estados Unidos, nascido na Etiópia, filho de pais provenientes da Índia. Além de médico, Abraham tornou-se também escritor. E foi a propósito da nossa conversa no último episódio que recordei e fui rever esta TED Talk e decidi partilhar alguns pedacinhos convosco. Como já aqui contei, eu costumava abrir o ano letivo com os meus alunos do 4º ano de Medicina com esta TED Talk. Porquê? Porque me era muito útil para lhes apresentar as características e valores fundamentais da medicina geral familiar. Por exemplo, a passagem que acabamos de ouvir permitia-me demonstrar a importância da orientação comunitária no trabalho de um médico de família, a importância do bom conhecimento da comunidade e do meio em que o nosso paciente se encontra inserido para com isso melhorarmos a forma como cuidamos dos nossos pacientes. Segundo as próprias palavras do Abraham, com esta TED Talk ele pretende apresentar a inovação mais importante da medicina. E qual é essa inovação? É o poder da mão humana para tocar, confortar, diagnosticar e tratar. Noutra passagem da sua talk, Abraham fala-nos daquele quadro famoso, o The Doctor, de Luke Fields.
And this particular painting, I think, represents the pinnacle, the peak of that clinical era. This is a very famous painting, The Doctor, by Luke Fields. Luke Fields was commissioned to paint this by Tate, who then established the Tate Gallery. And Tate asked Fields to paint a painting of social importance. And it's interesting that Fields picked this topic. Fields' oldest son, Philip, died at the age of 9 on Christmas Eve after a brief illness. And Fields was so taken by the physician who held vigil at the bedside for 2-3 nights that he decided that he would try and depict the physician in our time, almost a tribute to this physician, and hence the painting, The Doctor. Very famous painting. It's been on calendars, postage stamps in many different countries. I've often wondered, what would Fields have done had he been asked to paint this painting in the modern era, in the year 2011? Would he have substituted a computer screen for where he had the patient? I've gotten into some trouble in Silicon Valley for saying that the patient in the bed has almost become an icon for the real patient who's in the computer. I've actually coined a term for that entity in the computer. I call it the eye patient. The eye patient is getting wonderful care all across America. The real patient often wonders, where is everyone? When are they going to come by and explain things to me? Who's in charge? There's a real disjunction between the patient's perception and our own perception as physicians of the best medical care.
Ao ouvir estas palavras, é difícil não pensarmos na nossa prática clínica e neste equilíbrio muitas vezes difícil entre a atenção que o nosso paciente necessita e, por outro lado, a atenção que temos que dar ao computador, aos registros, aos indicadores e a outras burocracias. Ou, colocando as coisas sob uma outra perspectiva, a atenção que nós próprios gostaríamos de dar, porque sentimos que o nosso paciente assim o necessita, e aquela que realisticamente podemos dar devido a constrangimentos de várias ordem e que muitas vezes nem dependem de nós. Uma outra parte muito interessante desta TED Talk é aquela em que o Abraham destaca a relevância do exame físico e apresenta o exame físico sob uma perspectiva antropológica como um ritual, como algo diferenciador e que torna única a nossa relação, a relação médico-doente. E a este respeito partilho mais um excerto.
Now, I've been influenced in this thinking by 2 anecdotes that I want to share with you. One had to do with a friend of mine who had a breast cancer, had a small breast cancer detected, had her lumpectomy in the town in which I lived. This was when I was in Texas. And she then spent a lot of time researching to find the best cancer center in the world to get her subsequent care. And she found the place and decided to go there, went there, and which is why I was surprised a few months later to see her back in our own town getting her subsequent care with her private oncologist. And I pressed her, and I asked her, why did you come back and get your care here? And she was reluctant to tell me. She said, the cancer center was wonderful. It had a, beautiful facility, giant atrium, valet parking, a piano that played itself, a concierge that took you around from here to there. But, she said, they did not touch my breast. Now, you and I could argue that they probably did not need to touch her breast. They had her scanned inside out. They understood her breast cancer at the molecular level. They had no need to touch her breast. But to her, it mattered deeply. It was enough for her to make the decision to get her subsequent care with her private oncologist, who every time she went examined both breasts, including the axillary tail, examined her axilla carefully, examined her cervical region, her inguinal region, did a thorough exam, and to her that spoke of a kind of attentiveness that she needed. I was very influenced by that anecdote.
Abraham, como infecciologista, cuidou de muitas pessoas infectadas por HIV e vivenciou o surgimento deste vírus no seu período inicial. Vale muito a pena ouvir o testemunho com que ele encerra esta TED Talk.
I am a writer, and I want to close by reading you a short passage that I wrote that has to do very much with this scene. I'm an infectious disease physician, and in the early days of HIV, before we had our medications, I presided over so many scenes like this. I remember every time I went to a patient's deathbed, whether in the hospital or at home, I remember my sense of failure. The feeling of I don't know what I have to say, I don't know what I can say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And out of that sense of failure, I remember I would always examine the patient. I would pull down the eyelid, I would look at the tongue, I would percuss the chest, I would listen to the heart, I would feel the abdomen. I remember so many patients, their names still vivid on my tongue, their faces still so clear. I remember so many huge, hollowed-out, haunted eyes staring up at me as I performed this ritual. And then the next day, I would come and I would do it again. And I wanted to read you this one closing passage about one patient. I recall one patient who was at that point no more than a skeleton encased in shrinking skin, unable to speak, his mouth crusted with candida that was resistant to the usual medications. When he saw me on what turned out to be his last hours on this earth, his hands moved as if in slow motion, and as I wondered what he was up to, his stick fingers made their way up to his pajama shirt, fumbling with his buttons. I realized that he was wanting to expose his wicker basket chest to me. It was an offering, an invitation. I did not decline. I percussed, I palpated, I listened to the chest. I think he surely must have known by then that it was vital for me just as it was necessary for him. Neither of us could skip this ritual, which had nothing to do with detecting rales in the lung or finding the gallop rhythm of heart failure. No, this ritual was about the one message that physicians have needed to convey to their patients. Although God knows of late in our hubris, we seem to have drifted away. We seem to have forgotten. As if with the explosion of knowledge, the whole human genome mapped out at our feet, we are lulled into inattention, forgetting that the ritual is cathartic to the physician, necessary for the patient, forgetting that the ritual has meaning and a singular message to convey to the patient. And the message, which I didn't fully understand then, even as I delivered it, and which I understand better now, is this: I will always, always, always be there. I will see you through this. I will never abandon you. I will be with you through the end. Thank you very much.
Caros colegas, espero que esta TED Talk vos inspire tanto como me tem inspirado a mim desde que a descobri há mais de 10 anos. Com este episódio, partilhamos o link de acesso à TED Talk na íntegra, com legendas em português. Fiquem bem, continuem bem, até ao próximo episódio.
E terminamos assim esta edição do Podcast MGFamiliar. Muito obrigada por nos ouvir. Se desejar completar a sua leitura, muitos dos conteúdos abordados neste podcast estão disponíveis em www.mgfamiliar.net. Até ao próximo episódio.